Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we are finally going to be talking about the debut album from Last Sons called Chekhov's Gun. But let's start by talking about cosigns, because especially in recent years and with a shortened hype cycle, I'm always a little bit wary who an artist will support, either explicitly or implicitly. And I'll freely admit I do judge a couple acts by the people who sponsor them or that they choose to sponsor. And in today's day and age, it seems like the list of disappointments in that category keeps on piling up. Yeah, in an attention economy, one's word tends to matter a lot more than some people might think. I'm just saying. But in the case of an artist who does move with more integrity, I'm inclined to give them a bit more space and the benefit of the doubt. So let's talk again about Uncommon NASA, a New York underground hip-hop artist who has made my year-end list multiple times for good reason and has delivered some phenomenal albums, both as a writer and producer. So when he approached me about a project he entirely produced for a new group called Last Sons, featuring UK rapper Duke01 and DJ Furious P, I was kind of intrigued, especially considering how his production style has evolved, and thus far he has not put his name or word behind a bad artist. And when you count how many guest stars he had on 2017's Written at Night, that says a lot. And I referenced that album because that's where I got my first taste of both Duke01 and Furious P on the song Small Change, which was a great track, and I'd have to hope they would deliver as well here. So what do we get on Chekhov's Gun? Well, unsurprisingly, it wound up sounding pretty great, and I've been having a lot of consistent fun with this the past week. But if you're expecting a traditional Uncommon NASA project in terms of bars or production, you might be a little surprised by this. Mostly because while his production is always very layered and cacophonous, this album as a whole, it feels a little bit more straightforward for once. Now, part of this was inevitable with Duke01 taking more of a driver's seat in terms of the rapping and bars, but as a whole, this project feels more aggressive and kinetic without necessarily sounding heavier or grimmer or darker, which is absolutely a departure from projects like Written at Night or Autonomy Music with Short Fuse. As such, it might be one of the most accessible projects to come out of this subsection of indie hip-hop in some time. And yeah, it's pretty great as a result. But let me make this abundantly clear. Because of a lot of this content, I would argue that it was absolutely the right decision to make this a bit more accessible. Because while there's been political text and subtext in NASA's projects before, Duke01 is pushing this in a much more contentious, aggressive, and explicit direction. Which means that I get to bring out my 3 Ps for good political art: power, precision, populism. And as for the most part, it's hard to deny that a focus on more direct topics and storytelling allows Chekhov's Gun to consistently deliver across the board here, especially for as in tune and anti-corporate as this album can feel. And sure, the dystopia of Welcome to Corporatonia, it might feel a little bit obvious, as well as the criticisms of customer data exploitation on 21st Century Power Digital Breakdown, or the corrupted media apparatus on Phoney Plaguestation, but devil's all in the details there for all these songs, and the biting slices taken at online fascism on Technicolor Terror and white nationalist movements on Bright New Yesterday, they feel all the more relevant today, and that was refreshing. And what was even more refreshing was how Duke01 didn't really shy away from showcasing some monolithic but vulnerable systems. And thanks to NASA's production and Furious P slicing the samples to ribbons, showcasing how fractured and compromised some of these systems might be, that's only more promising. Take how so much of the melodic tones behind Phoney Plaguestation sound kind of like old TV news intros, all amidst Duke01 showcasing the corporate interests behind news story prioritization, language, and how it's all built to reinforce our existing biases rather than challenge them. Or take 21st Century Power Digital Breakdown. I'm always a little bit wary of songs that tackle the data economy as it is, given my experience in that field, given my other job. But the presentation here is a bit more balanced and done pretty well. More on how corporations will use data to offer convenience or even a voice to those who might be deprived of it, but at the expense of all their privacy, and that could be a dangerous question indeed. But the second half of this album is where things really snap into place. Technicolor Terror is a great showcase of how proto-fascist movements online rewrite historical trends trends and tradition to fit their prejudices and further inflame blind rage. And Bright New Yesterday shows how the same nationalist spirit within the UK that might have had a place against the Third Reich in World War II might be perverted by propaganda. And then NASA goes even further on his verse, highlighting the distractive ways that authority uses to deflect from confronting their own culpability and racial prejudice, and how it's just waiting for it to die out. It's not a solution. It didn't work in the 80s, it's not working now. Now, I'll freely admit I was most drawn to the political content first. It's most distinctive, and Duke 01's got a flair for detail, and NASA's never been one to pull punches with a lot of dizzying intensity. But you know what? There are definitely cuts where the straightforward bars are just as entertaining. While I do wish the vocal blending and fidelity was a little bit more cohesive on Champion with Short Fuse and Barry McLean's hook, the latter of which probably needed a few more layers to fully work and maybe a few more lines as well. All the verses there, they were distinctive and potent, and the title track followed suit in showing just how much their words can indeed be weapons. But on the flip side, you get Morphine, which dives into a conflation of hip-hop with drugs and the music industry that doesn't shy away from the addictive high, but also the grubby, all-consuming withdrawal and the lows. And I'll say it, the closing track, Actually Happening, might be the bounciest song I have ever heard coming out of Duke 01 or NASA. A little bit alarming given how utterly apocalyptic it is, as systems and humans fail in graphic detail. Not the first time that this is referenced on the album, for the record. NASA sees many of the same fractures on Champions, but it's insanely catchy and it's a great way to close out this project. I honestly wasn't sure NASA had a production like this in him. And while we're here, let's talk about Duke 01 specifically as an MC for a second. I'd argue in the current climate, his British accent doesn't quite overpower his content the same way it can for other UK MCs, but I will admit I had to request a copy of the lyrics just so I could ensure I didn't miss anything amidst a lot of fast flows and dense production. And if I were to nitpick him here, it'd come in some of this. Because for as good as some of his sloganeering and hooks can be, he's got a tendency to let his bars pile up rather than hold back to draw emphasis to the right words or punchlines. Bit of a shame given how vivid and striking his wordplay can be. I just wish it hit harder. But you know what, if I have a larger criticism, it might come in some of the production. And this can be pretty consistent from me with Uncommon NASA, given that for as dense and claustrophobic as the samples and scratching can be, there will inevitably be tones chosen that I just don't like as much as the others. For example, the blaring quasi-chiptune synths that slice over megaton blasts, they feel unnecessary and distracting from Duke 01's bars, as are the oily oscillations drizzled all over 21st century power digital breakdown. More to the point, for as stentorian and heavy-hitting as this album is trying to be, you can also tell that NASA isn't quite in his comfort zone in the same way, especially when the production does feel a little bit cleaner. I already referenced Champion, which is trying really hard to be anthemic, but it doesn't quite seem to have the consistent body or development in the hook to really just knock it out of the park. Which is kind of exasperating for me to say, because there are absolutely songs that have that, they just tend to be a little bit more twisted and thorny and heavy, calling back more to the Bomb Squad as NASA's referenced, like the scratch-driven cacophonous crush of Welcome to Corporatonia with the added echo around the hook, or the contorted discordant guitar bounce on Already Happening, or on the flip side, the shrieking echoes of the vocal samples opposite that flat buzz of the guitar in Morphine, or the muddy, warping grind of Technicolor Terror, or the damp, tropical murk playing around the lumbering hook and sample driving the title track. And don't get me wrong, I think NASA's sound and Furious P's vital contributions, it lends this album a ton of distinctive texture and a real swagger that I absolutely respect, and I think it is an interesting idea for him to delve into cleaner, possibly more alien tones. It opens up new territory for him. I'm just thinking the anthemic side didn't quite stick there as well as he might have been hoping. But still, I've been consistently enjoying this album, and it's a promising and distinctive side project. Duke 01 absolutely proved his own here in content and bars, and while this style of hip-hop is never quick or easy to digest, this is probably one of the more accessible joints, and a good way to hop into this brand of New York City meets UK underground hip-hop. It's well-paced, dense without being impenetrable, and shows a lot of real progression for everybody. A few small missteps, but nothing all that serious that detracts from it. In other words, 8 out of 10. Absolutely recommended. Again, like with any Uncommon NASA project, this is tough stuff to process, especially for fans of mainstream rap, and even for some fans of indie rap. And the politics this time, they are not playing around. But given where we are right now, you know what, I kinda needed this. So yeah, this is pretty great. check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know this will not be for everyone, even a lot of indie hip-hop heads. This is dense and it's very political, and that only specifically has a certain audience, but again, where we are right now, I think there's definitely more of an audience than you would otherwise expect for it. It kind of came at the right time, and I'd like to see this get a little bit more traction. So if you'd like to buy or stream it, links down there below, and I got the poll up there. I'm curious where some of you guys fall on this, because again, it is a little bit more outside of what would be considered the mainstream, or even just indie rap's mainstream. But hey, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you guys want to help support the channel, link to my Patreon right over there. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.